Hi everyone, and it is time for an August wrap-up. So it is the 8th of August. I finished my first book yesterday, so it's time to talk about it, and that is The Burning God by R.F. Kuang. So this is the third book within the Poppy War trilogy. Poppy War trilogy is a fantasy series inspired by the Second Sino-Japanese War, taking place within China. It is a reimagining of Chinese history, a very loose reimagining. There are definitely quite a lot of things that you can recognize from Chinese history, but it's not like events will unfurl in the same way. In this one we are following Rin, who is a girl who was orphaned during the first two Poppy Wars. She is taken in by her sort of like aunt and uncle. However, they kind of treat her like the help, and she wants to escape this situation by entering into the state exams, hoping to win the top spot and land a place in Synagogue Academy. Some of the main things that I love about this is the links to Chinese history. So I love being able to spot the ways in which R.F. Kuang took inspiration from Chinese history. She herself has kind of explained that she wanted to write a series as a kind of way to see how does somebody become a Mao Zedong. So I very much enjoy seeing those parallels, seeing the inspiration and the way that she played with it. Another thing I really enjoy about this one is the cruelty of war. This one does not shy away from showing you the dark side to war and how the reality of war, you know, war often in literature, in media is kind of glorified, and I always like it when certain books or movies or things like that actually go into the nitty-gritty of war and show you the shock, the emotional trauma, the disorientation, the real cost that war has. As for our main character Rin, she is absolutely a horrible person. I know that there are people who really love the character of Rin, but I hate Rin. I think Rin is a horrible person. She is very self-involved. She is absolutely not self-aware. She is constantly thinking so highly of herself, and then she's also constantly thinking like, I'll do this from now. Next time I'll do this, and you already know she won't because she isn't aware of the reason why she did certain things in a certain way. So she's a very annoying character to read from in my perspective, and she is definitely, I wouldn't even say morally grey. I would say she's morally black, but she is to that extent a person that I constantly am waiting for people to slap her around. But because she does grow quite powerful throughout the series, she sadly doesn't get put in her place as often as I would like her to. When it comes to this third one, there isn't too much for me to talk about, of course, because I cannot go into spoilers. I will say I had a good ride with this. This very much goes into quite a lot of the political tactics. Once again, we're also looking more into the question of the relationship between the East and the West, and the way in which Western superiority, or the way in which the West sees itself as culturally and intellectually superior, the impact that that has on the populations of the areas that they're visiting. They're trying to spread their message that, you know, our God is the correct God, our way of life is the correct way of life, you are just backwards in your ways, and the impact that that has on the people that they are selling this message to. You know, sure, they are met with resistance, and sure, they are met with quite a lot of resentment and things like that, but these messages also kind of simmer in. And the evidence that they have of, you know, the way in which they see these inventions that the West has made that they cannot even fathom makes them think, what if they are right? Whereas there are a lot of inventions that we, the West, have taken from all parts of the world. There is a reason why the West is there in the first place. They are there because they want something of these populations, and so the impact that this has on the psyche of this population is just so sad to read about. It's so sad to read characters who start to question whether they are indeed morally, intellectually inferior to the West because of that message being spread to them. And so this is a conversation that is taking place quite extensively throughout this book. Aside from that, there is quite a lot about war tactics around this time in Chinese history. The way in which wars were being fought were changing, and so we also see that within this book. One of the biggest, you know, sort of like guidebooks surrounding war is The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And so this book kind of talks about how this guidebook kind of needs to be thrown out the window at this point in time, because the way in which wars are fought have completely changed. and the way in which you can win a war is by actually not following these rules and regulations that both sides have been studying for decades and centuries. And so those are things I really enjoy about it. What I don't necessarily enjoy a whole lot about this one is the ending. I was kind of hoping for a specific ending to this one, but I actually expected her to stop earlier, to stop the story at an earlier point within this story and to stop with a different sort of ending, which, as I said, I can't go into because of spoilers. But so the ending as we got it now, I'm just not satisfied with it. But so yeah, not the heartbreaking ending to the series that a lot of people have experienced this as being, but I was not really expecting to be heartbroken either. I was kind of, the ending that I had in mind, I would not be heartbroken with, and this different version of the ending is also one that leaves me not heartbroken at all, but I was expecting that, because I was expecting that you probably needed to be rooting for Rin in order for you to be heartbroken with the way in which this series would end because of her being the protagonist. And as I said, I was hoping for horrible things to happen to Rin, basically. Hey guys, it is the 16th of August, I believe. I have 2 other books to update you guys on. The first one I'm going to be really brief about, and that's The First Binding by R.R. Verdi. So I finished this book on Saturday morning, I believe, and yeah, it was a full-on mixed bag. So this is my most anticipated release for the year. I got a uncorrected digital proof through the publisher, through NetGalley, and the uncorrectedness of the proof definitely had some impact, because there was definitely quite some errors in it where, you know, a word would be missing or a word would be repeated, which would, you know, like kind of take me out of it a little bit. But it's definitely not the only problem I had with this book. So very much for me it turned out to be a mixed bag. This is a story about Ari, who is a traveling bard who, you know, tells stories along the Golden Road, which is basically this world's equivalent of the Silk Road. And he tells his stories in exchange for life and board, basically. And along the way, he then meets this woman called Eloise, and he will tell his life story to her. And so we get a narrative that takes place on multiple levels. Basically, mainly we have a frame story and a story within a story. And then on both levels, from time to time, Ari or a different character will be telling a story, and we get that full story as well within that segment of text. Now, sadly, I was only really interested in the story within the story, so that definitely made my pacing a big problem with this book. And there were definitely also some portrayals of women that I found to be borderline misogynistic, some crossing that line, but I will definitely check in the final copy whether some of those lines have stayed in there or whether they were caught within editing. But so overall, I had an okay time with this, but that is just about it. So it remains under 3 stars for me because of how much I struggled with the frame story and within which the story is being told. And I would have very much more enjoyed this as a traditionally told chronological story starting in his childhood. And aside from that, the writing style was just a writing style that I don't necessarily enjoy that much. A little bit too elaborated, a little bit too clumsy, I would kind of say, to some extent. I felt like the language chosen could be more purposeful. So yeah, mixed bag, but I have a full review out for it that I will link up here. So these are just like my sort of like summary of my thoughts about it. And then I also read a book for the Cat Lady Readathon, which is hosted by Liana from Liana Reads. And I read The Guest Cat by Takashi Hiraide. And so this is a book that I find difficult to recommend because, yeah, even for me who reads a lot of Japanese literature, sometimes this book felt a little bit too slice of life, a little bit too lacking in purpose. So in this book we are looking at this couple living in Japan. One of their neighbors has a cat, and this cat from time to time wanders over to their property and wanders into their lives. And so it is very much about the relationship that they built with this cat and the way that that boundary between their love for that cat and that cat actually belonging to the neighbors creates some interesting dynamics. The way that they sometimes start to kind of see her as their cat, and kind of consider her as their cat to some extent, and kind of almost have this sort of shock reaction to seeing the cats at their neighbors and being like, oh, what is our cat doing there, whereas it's actually their cat, you know. And I will already spoil you guys for something. It happens in the middle of the book, but I do think you kind of need to, I would want to go into it with that knowledge. And so I'll put the book down for a second if you don't want to hear it. And that is that the cat dies in the middle of the book. So it is not a graphic description or anything like that. It is actually a really shocking thing where they just basically say like, and the cat is basically missing for like a few pages, and then it basically says like it turns out that the cat had died, you know, midway through the novel. And I was not expecting that at all, and so that's why I kind of want to say it. I did not have an emotional impact from it, but I could see that other people might have much more of an emotional reaction to that event taking place. And since it happens in the middle of the book, it really feels like it's really unexpected, you know. But so yeah, as I said, this book is very much about the complex relationship that they have with this cat and the difficulty of them not being the owners and the complexities that produces in their relationship with the cat. And similarly, and on a parallel level, that is also happening when it comes to the house that they are inhabiting. They are renting this house from an elderly couple, and from the beginning almost of this novel we see that there are some health problems with this couple. So the man and so they both go to hospital, I think, at some point in time because of the health situation of the husband. But even when the husband passes away, it still seems like the future of this couple within this house isn't guaranteed. And so it's also about their relationship to this house, to this property, the life that they've built there, and the difficulty of moving on and searching for a different place. That's also part of what the story is about. So it's very much slice of life. As with a lot of Japanese literature, the way it is described is a lot more detached. It's not very emotional in this case, and so you can kind of start to feel like, why am I reading this? But I did definitely enjoy the exploration of the themes within this book, and the book definitely made me think as well. So I do definitely think that there is merit to this one. And if it finds the right audience, it can be a great fit. But I think it's also, for a lot of people who would just pick this up without much knowledge, you're easily going to expect something other than what you're getting. But so, yeah, that is my incoherent thoughts about the guest cat. Alright, a few more days have passed. I mean, a full week probably since I last updated you guys. And I have made quite some progress, but it's also because I've been mainly reading shorter stuff. I've also DNF'd the book. I will potentially finish another book still today, though probably that's a little bit too ambitious. Probably it'll be for tomorrow, but in any case I'll update you guys at that point in time. Let me first talk about the ones that I don't really have too much to say about it, and those are the comic books. So I read, in the correct order, I read Angel Volume 1, Buffy Volume 2, and then I read part of Buffy the Chosen One. So basically I am reading according to an order that you can find online. I'll have the link to the order in the description box for this series. But so these are 3 volumes of Buffy Reboot series. It's basically the story of the TV show Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but it's kind of like shifted a little bit, and some of the like representation that is in the show from a later point in time is already put into the comic books from the beginning, but also story-wise there are definitely things that have changed. Now, as to these comics, I don't really have too many opinions. I like the way that it's done. I definitely think it feels reminiscent of the series and still offers new things for people who have loved the show and who just want more Buffyverse content. I did enjoy the Angel volume a little bit more than the Buffy one, I think, because with the Buffy one I just felt like it was over before I knew it. I just wanted more from it, and I don't know whether that just means that I'm more invested in it or that the Angel one just had a little bit more of a well-rounded story arc, whereas I feel like the Buffy one just kind of starts in the middle and ends in the middle of action, and so doesn't really feel like a cohesive whole in that sense. And when it comes to Buffy the Chosen One, so this is a comic book collection in which there are stories gathered from previous Vampire Slayers. Potentially we will at one point get like future Vampire Slayers even. I don't even know that, but that would be interesting. But I definitely enjoyed the ones that we read here. So I read the first 3 short stories within this one, and I just really love seeing the other vampire slayers. I've always enjoyed it within Buffy the Vampire Slayer when we got to see other slayers. You know, there are 2 slayers that we run across within the present day timeline, but there are also a few Buffy episodes in which we have flashbacks and we see past slayers. I always enjoyed like seeing them put slayers in different cultures, different timelines and stuff like that. So that also is what I really enjoyed about these little stories, though they're of course really short because they're basically sort of like the origin stories of all of these different slayers. But so yeah, I really enjoyed consuming this. And then the next thing that I have to talk about is a DNF. And so I DNF'd Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. So this is a sci-fi book. Andy Weir is the author of The Martian, which was made into a very successful movie. I watched that movie, really enjoyed that movie. I have not read the book for that, and I might still try. I think that there are things that I enjoy about this book that could potentially work better in The Martian, but that will just have to be like a case of trial and error. So it wasn't that I hated this book neither. So in Project Hail Mary, we basically have this astronaut who wakes up in space, doesn't really know what is happening, who he is, why he's there, where he is even, and basically using science he will start to connect those dots. Now I think the beginning worked the best for me because of the fact that we have this intrigue of him trying to figure that out, and we as a reader kind of already know some of the answers because of the synopsis. And so basically this was potentially a book that you go in knowing as little as possible, that would be the best way to go into this one. But I really enjoyed that beginning where you're kind of trying to figure out, because yes, we know some of the basics based off of the premise, but still we don't know much neither ourselves. And so it was interesting to have him kind of try and figure out all of these things. However, it also felt kind of gimmicky because basically he has this memory loss, but very early on he's kind of figures out how to trigger memories, you know, like purposely thinking of something that he wants to remember makes him remember, which kind of makes it seem more like the structure is being used as a gimmick, as a sort of like fun little element to structure the story around, but it doesn't really pose much of an obstacle to him if just thinking about something purposefully will unlock the memory that he's looking for, you know. So I found that to be a little bit annoying. Aside from that, I quite enjoyed the humor that is placed within this to some extent, but sometimes it goes into the goofiness a little bit too much. And aside from that, there's just too much science in it for me. You know, I enjoy the unlocking of answers through science. However, I felt like there was so much more science than there was story here. I felt like we were kind of missing on an actual interesting storyline throughout this one. I didn't really care at some point anymore. It was just like the story seemed to be there just so that he could perform some science almost, you know. So I know that I stopped right before sort of like interesting section, and I know that some people really love the character that we're about to be introduced to within this one. But honest to God, I really didn't care enough. I did, at the moment in which I was putting this down, consider that this was going to happen. And then I also read some reviews, and even though a whole lot of people absolutely love that section of the book, most people who seem to really love that section seem to have loved the entire book. And I did look at some of the negative reviews of some people who had pushed through to the end, who kind of still felt like the beginning section was their favorite section, and who didn't necessarily who gave some critiques of the section that was about to come that made me think that I would probably personally also not gel very well with that ending. So yeah, this one didn't end up working for me. This is the book for the Howling Pack by The Wild Sasha. I knew from the get-go that this was kind of a potential miss for me, so this is also why I got it from the library rather than invest in my own copy, because I knew from the get-go that sci-fi is a genre that I haven't explored too much of, and so I also didn't necessarily know whether this was going to work for me. And so sadly this one landed in the negatives pile for me. So it was not necessarily a book that I disliked, it's just a book that I didn't care enough about to want to continue. Alright guys, so I haven't updated you guys in a while because I was off during the weekend, and usually during the weekend is when I get out this camera to, you know, update. And so I got quite a few books to go through, so it is actually the last day of the month when I'm filming this. So yeah, quite a little bit of a catch up to go through. So first up, I finished The Final Strive by Sarah L. Arifi. This is a book that I actually want to do a separate video on, so I probably won't go into too much depth. This is a epic high fantasy adult book in which we are looking at a society in which the color of your blood determines quite a lot. Basically, blood color is kind of used to talk about racist issues within our real world. Aside from representation for racism, there is also representation for ableism, because we have a disabled character. And then there's also trans rep within this one. So there's a lot of representation and a lot of interesting thematics. This is often said to be a good crossover with YA because of the fact that a lot of its thematic are very much on the surface. So it isn't like you have to search your way through the layers of the text in order to understand what the book is trying to talk about. It is very much on the surface, and I actually really enjoyed this about this particular read. I don't always enjoy it, but in this one it worked really well. Aside from that, this is a very much fast-paced book, which normally doesn't work for me, but once again in this book it absolutely worked for me. So I was sucked in from the beginning. I really flew through this one. I enjoyed it a whole ton. I listened to it on audio, so I would definitely say that I recommend the audiobook. I very much enjoyed my time with it. As indicated, in this world, the color of your blood has a huge impact on your social standing, and basically people with red blood are at the top of the hierarchy, so to speak. However, at one point, people with blue blood kind of took their revenge by kidnapping a ton of red-blooded children and replacing them with blue-blooded children, trying to raise these red-blooded children in order for them to one day be able to infiltrate the top layers of society and make change happen from within. This book is also sapphic, and as I said, I had a great time with it, a fun ride with it. I do want to make a specific video for it because I had such a good time with this one. Really one of my standouts for this month. The next thing that I finished is another one that I had an absolutely amazing time with throughout this month, and that is Song for Our Bond by Guy Gabriel Kay. And so this is a book that perhaps I would have never picked up if I hadn't heard about it from Kristen's Fully Booked, and if she hadn't been hosting a read-along for it. And so I thought, like, okay, let's just jump on the bandwagon. This is a standalone book, and I have seen the name of Guy Gabriel Kay float around the internet, and I do want to give him a go at some point. And I really enjoyed the writing style for this one a whole lot. This book very much centers around the opposition between two types of cultures, a more sort of like women-friendly culture and very much a male-centric misogynistic society. The story takes place over the course of 4 seasons. We are following a wide range of characters. Some of them we will have multiple chapters by. Certain characters we only will read about in one particular chapter or anything like, or something like that. However, I still always felt like these perspectives worked really well. Even when we only had a perspective for maybe like one chapter, I still very much felt invested in that chapter, invested in that perspective. I really enjoyed this book a whole lot. I enjoyed the narrative perspective especially. I will say that this is definitely historical fantasy with light presence of magic. There is definitely some mysticism surrounding religion within this story. However, you won't see any flying dragons or any spells being cast or anything like that. But yeah, I had a great time with this one, and I really flew through this one. I kind of had to keep myself from continuing past the section that I was reading every single week in this one. So I do want to give more Guy Gabriel Kay a go at some point in time. And another great benefit about this one in particular is that it is a standalone. Next up, I finished Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel, who is very well known for Station 11. And like with Station 11, I just don't think I'm the audience for this one, because Station 11, I enjoyed it, but that was about it. You know, I didn't have a lasting impression of that book. I wasn't blown away by it. I wasn't especially engaged with it. And so when afterwards I joined BookTube and I heard so many people raving about it, I was like, wait, did I read a different book, or maybe I wasn't paying attention enough, or what? And with Sea of Tranquility, I just have a sort of similar experience. I enjoyed it fine, but I didn't really love it or anything like that. Describing Sea of Tranquility is actually somewhat difficult. We start the story off with one particular character, and he has just been like kind of banished from his homeland of England to move over to Canada because of his progressive views, and he's kind of going around there not really knowing what to do, and at some point in time he witnesses something strange, and that's kind of where the mystery starts to set in when it comes to this story. This is a time travel story, And basically my main interest in this book came from that aspect and came from knowing that aspect from the beginning, because it takes a while for you to actually be introduced to the fact that there is time travel within this book. And if I had not been waiting for that point in the book, I think I could have easily just put it down immediately, and I still could have, because it doesn't really pan out in the end. I think the time travel aspects came together really well towards the ending, and I really liked seeing how everything was like kind of interconnected and how that had been set and how that setup came to fruition towards the end, but it didn't pay out for me. I wasn't blown away by that neither. I was like, oh, okay, that's nicely done. However, I hadn't enjoyed the process enough to be able to love the end result. So for me, if this hadn't been an audiobook, I probably wouldn't have gone through with it. I probably would have DNF'd it at some point. But with this just being an audiobook and just an easy read for me in that sense, I didn't mind continuing to listen to it. But I also feel like I'll forget everything about this book in a few days. Next up we have a reread, and this is a sort of like surprise reread. Not really. I knew there was the potential for me to reread this book, but I didn't know for sure whether I was going to get my hands on this one in time. And luckily I've had really good results with pre-orders this month, because I pre-ordered 3 books and all 3 of them came to me before release dates, which is very exceptional for Belgium. So the one that I did immediately read is The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle. This is a reread for me. I have watched the animation show numerous times when I was a young child, and then a few years ago I for the first time read the book, and so I also reread it in this beautiful new edition that has just come out, beautiful hardback edition of The Last Unicorn. Now I will say that I cannot make an objective statement about The Last Unicorn, because it's just tied in with so much nostalgia for me. I will say that it read a little bit slow for me, so I think that if there wasn't this nostalgia linked to it, then potentially I wouldn't really enjoy the language in it as much, because I do think that the language is a little bit more elaborate than what I typically enjoy reading. But so yeah, this story just has my entire heart. Talking about it again just makes me want to go like, I need to rewatch the movie, because I said I was going to watch the movie after reading this, but then I went on a weekend away with friends, and so I couldn't at that point in time, and now I'm like, yeah, I should really make that a thing. So The Last Unicorn is about a unicorn living a peaceful life in her forest, and one day some travelers pass through and they mention how all of the unicorns in the world have disappeared, and so she sets out into the wide world to kind of figure out what happens. Is she really the last unicorn, and if so, what happens to all of the other unicorns? Amazing book, amazing movie, watch it. I mean, I say that because it has all of this nostalgia. I don't know whether that holds up if you don't have nostalgia for this series, but I definitely enjoyed this story a ton, and I'm so happy that I have this beautiful edition of it. And then we get to the final few days of this month, and I have actually started a bigger book, but I won't be finishing it this month, so I'll just mention the 2 other things that I finished within this month, which basically are things that I just kind of finished because I wasn't feeling like reading after this weekend, and then I needed something really, really short in order for me to still finish my magical readathon TBR. So the final prompt that I had to complete was Wings on the Cover, and for that I read Just Peachy, which is a comic book all about mental health, basically about the author's journey with depression and anxiety. And you know, it's a short comic book. It is not like a cohesive story or anything like that. It's just like cartoon strips basically, and there a lot of times it's more about how recognizable these things are rather than about them being funny. You know, it's not a funny haha type of cartoon. Certain of these cartoon strips have a level of humor to them, but it's not like laughing about depression or anxiety is the goal of these cartoons. Neither. It's about expressing what this author was feeling at that point in time, the experiences that she went through. And I enjoyed it for what it was. So if you're looking for content about depression or anxiety in comic book format, then I could definitely point you in this direction. It's very short, it's like 130 pages. So you will also just kind of like fly through it. The same is definitely also true for the final thing that I finished in the month of August, and that is The Kaiman by, I don't remember the author. This is translated from Spanish. It's a picture book. It was short, sweet. I won't say too much about it because how much can I say about like a 40-page picture book that won't completely spoil everything. But it's basically a story about this very tiny baby alligator that is taken in by a human at one point in time. And so I thought it was nice, it was cute, it was wholesome. And yeah, I had a good time with it, but it is of course, as I said, a 40-page picture book. There's not too much to it, but I definitely enjoyed my experience with it. But so yeah, with that, we are ending my reading for the month of August. I mean, I will probably still read a little bit today, probably in the book that I already started, though I am probably gonna do my first roll for Becca's Bookoplathon and see what I should be starting my month with. But so the number of books on my TBR will have been going down throughout this video. However, we need to add the books that I acquired throughout the month. And so the final number will be climbing to a nice, beautiful 29. So my TBR needs to be under 30 at all points in time. It was not under 30 at all points in time throughout the month of August, but we are ending under 30 at the end of the month, and that's enough for me, you know. I only take stock of what my TBR is like at the end of each month, so if at the end of each month it's under 30, then that is just fine by me. But so yeah, we will see what happens in the month of September. Will I be inquiring more books? There's definitely one book that will make its way to me, but I don't necessarily have plans for other books. But you know, we'll see, things have a habit of just turning up. But so yeah, with that, I'm going to end this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it and see you guys for the next one. Bye!